Alright, so now we're in the layout portion of Lightwave. Now in our 3D Garage courseware, we'll take you through every tab and every area that will show you and explain really how to use all these functions and what they do and what they mean and why they're there. For now, we're going to go the simple route and simply just load up our wheel created in Modeler. So I'm going to select Add from the Items tab, Add, Objects, Load Object, and Wheel 5 was my last object. Okay, now, first thing I want to do is I want to get into my camera view. Right now, we default to a perspective view. And the problem with this is that when you go ahead and set things up in this view, this is not what happens when you render. Everything from Lightwave is seen from the camera view. So we want to make sure we're in the camera view. So when we render out, everything will be seen from this view. Now down here at the bottom, just like in Modeler, there's points and polygons. There's objects, bones, lights, and cameras. This is telling Lightwave what we want to work with. We want to work with cameras. We want to move the camera. And then I click and push in. Now, big mistake people make is they're looking and they think, oh, well, I want this tire over here. So they click and drag to the right, forgetting that they're working with the camera and they're looking through the camera because they're in the camera view. Just like if you have a camcorder or a photography camera, you can just actually look and turn left if you want to see left. Same idea within Lightwave. Alright, so I'm going to click and push in with the left mouse. With the right mouse, I can move up or down and use your Option or your Apple key on the Macintosh. With the rotate button, click and turn this way. You can rotate around. Go back to move, move around, rotate, and center that up. And then I'll hit Create Key down here at the bottom. And this little panel comes up. Create motion key at frame 0. It says frame 0 automatically because that's where my timeline is right here. And I say OK. That says stay here, don't move for the camera. That's what we're working with. So if we move our timeline, the camera stays in place. Now I want to save the scene. So I go up to File, Save Scene As, and I'm going to go into a folder I've already set up called Scenes, and we'll call this Tire Setup. Easy enough, and you can see that the name now appears up in the title of the program. Now this little pink thing right here, that's a light source. So I'm actually just going to click on it and then just move it out of the way and hit Create Key for that. It's default distant light, so that's fine. It doesn't, we don't have to worry about its position. It's always going to look the same from that area. If we rotate it, it'll look different. Now, you can just barely see the floor over here that we created. So I'm going to click on that. And sometimes it's hard to select things. So the way I'm going to do it instead is come down here and I say, I want to work with objects. Well, which object? Well, if you remember, layer 2 was the floor we made. So I just select it from my list. If we had more objects, they would show up in here as well. And then I actually just want to move it kind of like that, just so it fills up the frame a bit. And I can even go in and say size, and I can size it up so it fills up the frame. Move it back a little bit more. There. And I'll hit Create Key to lock that in place. Now I'll save the scene again. And our scene is set up. Now I'm going to go Shift S and I'll just call this Tire 1. I'm just going to save our setup scene, so if we ever want to get back to where we started, we can always load this scene right here. First thing I want to do is put some treads on this tire. So I'm going to open up the surface editor. Make sure I pull this in so you can see it. And I'm going to select the tire. And what I'm going to do is open up Viper. It's right here on the left. It's always on the left-hand side of the screen. And Viper means Virtual Interactive Preview Renderer. This helps us by seeing instantly what we're doing versus always trying to render. However, you have to press F9 and render a frame first. And I'll close this out and close that. And I'll click the render button, and now what I've rendered shows up in Viper. That little render we did, pressing F9, puts that image in a buffer. And now Lightwave can work with it when we make our changes. For instance, let's say we go to our tire color, and I make it a little bit darker. Viper updates. Okay, maybe we don't want it so shiny. We'll bring that down and we want it to be duller, so I'll bring glossiness down, a little more rubber-like. Okay, now I'm going to go click the T button next to bump map. Okay, all these T buttons are identical, except there's a big difference depending on which area you click it. And in our full courseware, we go through and break down the texture map panel for you. And you'll understand how important this panel is to your entire Lightwave creation, from clip maps to displacement maps to bump maps to transparency maps and so on. Right now, we're simply just going to use a bump map. All right, let's start at the top. The layer type is an image map. The other types are procedural for computer generated or gradient to blend layers. We're not going to do that right now. We're just going to use an image map. We want it normal. If you're familiar with Photoshop at all, some of the very same features, additive, subtractive. Okay, we just want normal. We want to see 100% of it. And what's the projection type? Is it flat? No, it's not flat. Well, it's not round. No, it's more cylindrical. Okay, because it's a tire. All right, and we want to apply an image. Well, what's the image? Well, I already went into Photoshop and made one. It's just a little tire track. It's very, very simple. I would probably go outside and shoot a picture of a tire if this were just something I wanted to do, you know, if I was very serious about this and really wanted some photorealism, if I wanted to fly into the tires, I would go out and shoot a real tire tread and then make it black and white. For right now, we're just going to use a little zigzag pattern. Now you can see as soon as I click that, it appears. And this is why we want to use Viper, because if I move this aside, in layout, close this right here, you can't see the bump map. So you'd have to hit the render button in order to see it. Well, that's where Viper comes in, nice and handy, is that we don't have to render. We can see our bump automatically. However, you can see that it looks kind of stretched. So what I'm going to do is first say automatic sizing. Okay, didn't do anything. So that's where we need to increase the width wrap amount. And I'll just bump it up to 10. And then come over and click render. Okay, a little better. But they look like they're bumped out. I want them to go in, so I'm going to click the invert layer. Excuse me, and invert and click render again. There, now the bumps go in. Now, generally I should probably have surfaced the bottom side and told the sides to be a different surface, and we could have stenciled a name in there. There's many, many options you can use. Right now we're just surfacing the whole thing. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to bump this up to, say, 30. And when you're working in Lightwave in any of these panels, you should do one at a time. Do one feature at a time. Okay? If you change this and change this and change this, and something happens, you're not going to quite know what's working and what's not. Okay, so there's our tire tread. Maybe even just down to 20 is fine. Yeah, that's a little better. Now the tire itself, the bump is a little low. I wanted to make it a little deeper. So that's where this texture amplitude comes in. So for the amplitude, I'll bump it up to, say, 6. Anytime you see texture amplitude, that means the amount of bump. There we go. It's a nice bump in there. And now I'm going to go to copy, current layer, and that's this layer. We created a bump map texture layer, and then I'll say use texture. I'll open up my surface editor again, and the reason I copied that surface is that I want to apply it to the specularity texture. So I hit T for specularity, and I say paste, and then replace current layer. And now you see the shininess, but the shininess comes into play based on this image. All right, so what's happening here is notice how that light from the hotspot from the light falls in and out of those grooves. Basically what's happening here, because it's inverted, I could actually reverse it. Okay, either way, the dark areas right now are allowing more shininess. The white areas are allowing none. And any gray in between would basically allow for a variation, for a gradation. Okay, I don't want it that bright, so I'm just going to bring it down a little bit. But it helps give it a little bit more realism. Okay, click Use Texture, and then I'll say File, Save All Objects, and click Yes. The reason I click Save All Objects is because now that surface is saved with the object. If I'd hit Save Scene, all that does is save my lighting, my camera, my positions, my motions, everything else. The actual surfaces, the textures, are saved with the object. Now let's do the tire. Excuse me, not do the wheel of the tire. And now, in order to select, here's another cool thing about Viper. If I click right on this chrome area here, this automatically becomes selected right here. Watch, if I click in here. So that's not a big deal for this particular scene. However, if we had something really big like a cityscape, if you can say, well, oh, that window back there needs a texture, you can click right on that little window and it would automatically select it from the surface list. Nice, easy way to work. For the inner wheel, let's wait on that. Let's just do the outer wheel rim. Basically, we want this to be chrome, metal, something like that. So I'm going to give it a little more gray. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring my diffuse down. See this diffuse? This guy right here. Okay. This means accept 100% of the light in the scene. If I bring it to 0, it blackens out, accepts no light. Okay. I'm going to bring it down to about, oh, I don't know, 60% or so. And then what I'm going to do is jump down here to reflection, and I'm going to bump this up to about 30%. Okay? This is a general rule that I use, that diffuse and reflection should balance to equal about 100%. If this diffuse was 100% and I said reflect 30%, what would happen is that your object would be extra bright. So if I make a 30% reflection, I have to bring down some of the diffuse. It's just a general rule. And 100% is a good place to start. Sometimes you make it a little darker, sometimes a little brighter, but that's a good place to start. But 30% reflection, well, what is it reflecting? Well, a reflection is based on its environment. So we click over to the Environment tab, and we want to say Ray Trace and Backdrop, Spherical, Ray Trace and Spherical, Backdrop. Well, which one do you choose? Well, in this particular case, I want to actually have it reflect an image, but it would be a little more realistic if it reflected surroundings. The only surroundings in this, however, is the floor, but that'll be okay. So let's do this, Ray Tracing and Spherical Map. Okay, doesn't do anything, right? That's because I need to tell it to have an image. So right here from Reflection Map, I'll say Load Image, and I've made this image. It's just a picture of basically a pool, a blurred image. The contrast is blown out a bit. I'm going to click Edit Image, and I'll show this to you. It's pretty large, actually. This is all it is. It's just a picture of a pool, a bright sky, and then I just blew it out in Photoshop and blurred it a bit. Okay, that is actually what the tire is now reflecting, or the wheel, I should say. And even in here, if I wanted to, I could actually bump up the contrast. You can see how it looks in there. Bring the brightness down a bit, maybe. And perhaps even take out the saturation altogether so there's no color. So it's just black and white, which would give you a little bit more metallic look. I like a little bit of color in there. A little blue. Get a little bit of that pool, which gives more of a little sky look. Okay, so we'll keep it like that. That's fine. Okay, so there's that actual little chrome area reflecting. And I want to go back to the Basic tab. And let's give it some shininess. Even though it looks shiny, it could be a little bit more. So I'm going to increase the specularity. And you can see the highlights happen right there. And glossiness. Well, we don't want it too glossy. About like that. And I'm looking right here. I'm watching this. Now, I like how that looks, so I'm going to open up my presets. And I'm going to double-click this sample. And you can see down here that I now have a chrome sample. And I'm going to right-click on this and set the name to Wheel Chrome. And now it's something I can use in the future. I can reapply it to something else if I made more wheels or I have bumpers for a car or anything else. And at this point, I want to go File, Save All Objects. Now the only other thing I need to do is concentrate on that little center disk, that little brake disk thing in the middle there. So I'm going to right-click on the rim and say Copy. Go to my inner wheel, right-click and say Paste. Again, if you have a Macintosh, make sure you go ahead and you use your Apple key to simulate right mouse button functions. I highly suggest if you're on a Mac, go ahead and get a 2-button mouse. Much, much nicer for Lightwave. Okay, now, for the inner wheel, it doesn't need smoothing. Okay, because it's a flat object. And the outside, the smoothing's fine. Perhaps we might want to bring it down a little to about 40%, but I don't see any problem with it right now as it stands. If something is too smooth, it's going to look very odd. And when you see within our course, we'll actually cover beveling and creating 3D text and using the smoothing operation properly. So right now our tire is about ready to go. Let's set up some lighting and do the floor. Okay, so I'm going to close this, do one more file, save all objects, and a file, save scene.